Tonight we will Hail to the King. So this the shiur tonight is about the bracha upon seeing royalty. It's based on a shiur that I had seen from Rabbi Leibowitz in North Woodmere, for those that may be familiar. And I'd like to go through some of the sources on the subject. So we know that the Torah and Chazal require that anything that we see, especially special things, impressive things, and any experience that we have, we always attribute it to God. On the most simple level of brachos, we attribute the food, both before and after, to God. But we also know that there are brachos which are said to praise God for certain displays of, how can we put it, nature, etc. We know that there are brachas on thunder, on lightning. There's brachos on when you see a rainbow, even though there's a whole discussion as to whether you should be sharing that information with somebody else, because there are those who say that when it comes to a rainbow, it's basically God's testimony as saying, I'm really angry with you right now and I want to destroy you. So there are those, a little bit hard to understand, but there are those who suggest that if you tell a friend that you see a rainbow, it's like speaking lashon hara about the world. Basically saying, look, we're doing a pretty lousy job right now and God wants to destroy us, but he sort of can't because he told us that he wouldn't ever bring it. Again, there's a whole discussion. He could destroy us other ways, but not necessarily with water, but okay. And then we also know that there are obligations to recite brachas upon seeing certain places, a place that a nace happened to you, certain other places. And then there are also brachos which are required upon seeing certain types of people. Bracha is required actually on seeing a midget, seeing a giant. And there's also brachos required for saying impressive people, as we'll see tonight. We'll touch upon it. Somebody who's a chachmei Yisrael, or a chachmei umos ha'olam. In secular knowledge, a big Talmud chacham is actually a bracha you would make. But for our purposes tonight, we're not going to be discussing the intellectual capacity, but we want to focus on the obligation to recite a bracha upon seeing royalty, upon seeing a king, a queen, a president, a prime minister. I tried to do a little bit of research. It wasn't clear to me what the status of the prime minister of Canada is, so I might ask that somebody can, during the shiur as we get to it, maybe describe in relation to the president of the United States whether the prime minister has more or less power. But we'll get to that in just a few minutes. So let's start with the source of the obligation to make a bracha upon seeing royalty. In source number one, the Talmud Bavli says in Mesechus Brachos Nun Ches Amud Aleph, Haroeh Malchei Yisrael Omer Baruch Shechalak Michvodo Lireyav. A person who sees a Jewish king makes a bracha, and seemingly, as we'll see, it's a bracha with Shem Hashem. He makes a bracha Shechalak Michvodo Lireyav. He makes a bracha that he gave. That's why I don't like being taped. I can't leave the tape. We'll leave it over here. He makes a bracha that chalak, that he gave a piece of his kavod lireyav. Malchei umos ha'olam omer baruch shenasan michvodo lebasar v'dam. But the Malchei umos ha'olam, he makes a bracha that he gave michvodo lebasar v'dam. You'll notice right away that there's a difference in the lashon. There's a difference in the language. When you're making by a Malchei Yisrael, a Jewish king, so it's baruch shechalak, that gave a piece, and we'll have to see exactly the reason for that. And when you're making a bracha on a Malchei Umos Ha'olam, a non-Jewish king, so you say Baruch Shenasan, that he gave, as opposed to Chalak. You also notice that when it's talking about a Jewish king, you'll say Li Reyav, to those who fear him, and we'll see that has practical ramification as well. And as opposed to by a non-Jewish king, we say Li Basar Vadam. Not necessarily to somebody that fears God, but to a Basar Vadam, a human being. So you have two differences, Chalak Natan, Lireyav libasar vadam. That's the bracha that you make. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. But Rabbi Yochanan says that it's not just enough to make the bracha, right? We always talk about the mitzvah of shiluach hakein. So there's mitzvah of shiluach hakein, ki karei kan sipor lefanecha. If you happen to be walking and you see the kan sipor, you see the nest, so then there's a mitzvah of shiluach hakein. So I always like to say that when I was in YU, so when you go to the bulletin board, for those that have been in YU, outside of the old base medrash, I don't know if anybody's seen the new base medrash, but the old base medrash in Lamport Auditorium, where I went to high school as well. So outside the Beis Medrash, they have these signs, and they put all sorts of things that are not necessarily related to the Beis Medrash. So over there, there's a sign. It looks like, you think it's like a drug deal or something. It says like, for Shiluach HaKain, call this number. It's like the most random thing in the world. It's like, that's not the most thing. That's not usually the number you're dialing in Washington Heights over there with all the trucks that are open till the ice cream trucks in the middle of the winter that are open until 2 o'clock in the morning. But on the board over there, it says, for Shiluach HaKain, call this number. So there is a discussion that ki karei kan sipor lefanecha, that it needs to be something that just sort of happens to you and you can't necessarily, again, there's a discussion. But the point is that over here, as we'll see in a second, the Gemara says it's not just a matter of ki karei. It's not just a matter of that you make a bracha when you see a king, whether a non-Jewish king or a Jewish king. It's not just you happen to see it, so therefore make the bracha. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Le'olam yishtadel adam larutz likrat malchei Yisrael. That it's not just that you should make it if you happen to see a king. You should actually put in the hishtadlus, and you should make it your business to go ahead and greet a Jewish king. V'lo likrat malchei Yisrael bilvad, and you shouldn't just go ahead and try to see a Jewish king. Ela afilu likrat malchei umot ha'olam. You should make it your business, not ki karei, you shouldn't wait for them to come to town. You should make it your business to go ahead and see not only a Jewish king, but a non-Jewish king. Fascinating. Why? She'im yiskeh, because if you're yiskeh, yavchin bein malchei Yisrael le malchei umos olam. Because if you have this chus, you'll see the difference between a malchei Yisrael and a malchei umos olam. Who cares? What do I need to see the difference between a Jewish king and a non-Jewish king? So Rashi in source number 2, Rashi explains to us, she'im yiskeh le'olam haba. In olam haba, very interesting. V'yireh bekavod melech hamashiach. So what's he saying? He's not saying olam haba like the Garden of Eden that we're talking about. That's going to be a nice place. What's he using the word olam haba to describe? He's using olam haba to describe the times of Mashiach, when Mashiach's going to come, when we're going to have Techiyas HaMesim. So what does he mean over here? What does he mean? She'im yiskeh le'olam haba v'yireh bekavod melech hamashiach. What does he mean that you should make it your business in this world to see a Jewish king and even a non-Jewish king, so that im yiskeh le'olam haba v'yireh bekavod melech hamashiach. Just forget about the next Rashi. Yavchin bein malchei Yisrael lemalchei umos olam. What does he mean here? What does he mean? She'im yiskeh.
So if you learn the Rambam shot of the difference between olam hazeh and olam haba, the only difference is shibud malchiyas bovat. So then maybe it's important to understand it, to know what the Melech HaMashiach is going to look like versus what you used to.
So you're saying it's a Mitzvah thing that you should want to know what the Melech HaMashiach is going to look like. That's an interesting thing. Anybody else? What does it mean? She'im yiskeh le'olam haba v'yireh bekavod Melech HaMashiach. It sounds like what Rashi is saying is that you should make it your business to go ahead and see what kavod in this world is, bein malchei Yisrael, bein malchei umot ha'olam. Why? So that at the times of Mashiach, you'll see how much greater the kavod is that's given to the Mashiach relative to the kavod that was given to a king in this world. That's what he seems to be saying. He doesn't. It's an interesting suggestion, but I don't think he's necessarily saying that you won't be able to recognize the Mashiach otherwise. We all know what the Mashiach's going to look like: black hat, payas, and beard. No, depends who you ask, right? He'll be wearing a strugi. Depends who you ask. That's the machloket. That's why Mashiach's not here. Famous poem. Right? No, you never heard that one before? And the guy comes and he comes to the things and he says, "You can't be Mashiach. You're wearing a black hat." And then he goes to the Haredi and says, "You can't be Mashiach. You're wearing a strugi." So that's the pshat. So it is an interesting suggestion, but I'm not sure that it's so that we'll be able to recognize the Mashiach. What it sounds like Rashi is saying is that you should make it your business to see what honor is. How do you see what honor is in this world? By going to see the Malchei Yisrael, by going to see the Malchei Umot Olam, by going to see the Jewish and non-Jewish kings. And the importance of doing so is that when Mashiach ultimately comes, Bimheira B'Yameinu, you're going to be so blown away by the amount of kavod, by the amount of honor that's given to him, not just by the Jews, but by the entire world. You're going to be so blown away when you compare it to the kavod that you saw that was given even to the greatest king, the king that got the most kavod in this world. You're going to be blown away when that kavod pales in comparison to the kavod that's going to be given to the Melech HaMashiach. Very, very interesting. Now there's another Rashi which seems to say something totally else, something totally different, but it's an interesting Rashi nonetheless. Yavchin Kama yeser kavod not le schar mitzvos. Yoter mimasha haya kavod ha'umos ba'olam hazeh. The way I'm reading Rashi is that he's saying sort of like a side point, which is related, but not really our topic. But it sounds like he's saying, you know what, you should go ahead and see the kavod that's given to a king in this world, not necessarily to compare it to the kavod of Melech HaMashiach, because you're also going to see, besides for that, the kavod that's going to be given in Olam Haba at the times of Mashiach to those who in this world went ahead and did what they were supposed to do. Those who served HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And also then you're going to be able to compare, if you saw the kavod that's given to kings in this world, you'll be able to compare and contrast and see how much greater not only is the kavod that's given to Melech HaMashiach, but how much greater is the kavod that's given even to the people that served HaKadosh Baruch Hu in this world. That's how much kavod they're going to get in the next world. Be'olam haba, in the Zman of Mashiach, they're going to get so much kavod that it's going to pale in comparison to the kavod that the greatest king in this world, whether Jew or non-Jew, received. Very interesting. So that's the reason that you should be yishtadel to go ahead and see a melech, so that you can compare the honor, whether it's a Malchei Yisrael or a Malchei Umat Olam, you can compare that honor ultimately to the times of Mashiach, to the honor that's going to be given to Mashiach, to the honor that's going to be given to the Jews who served HaKadosh Baruch Hu faithfully in this world. You should be able to have a point of comparison. By seeing Malchei Yisrael and Malchei Umat Olam in this world, you'll have a point of comparison and you'll be blown away. And you'll be so excited and you'll be so impressed by how much more kavod the Melech HaMashiach and the people that are getting schar for serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu are going to get. I thought that was a quite fascinating Gemara. Fine. Now, the Shulchan Aruch brings this down halacha. The Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Cairo, 1575, passed away. So Shulchan Aruch says, Amalchei Yisrael Omer Baruch Atah Hashem. And you see, because it's interesting, the Gemara says, Baruch Shechalach Michodo Lireyav. And we'll see that there is a discussion that sometimes you would actually say it without the Shem Umalchus. But seemingly, even the Gemara, when it said Baruch, it meant Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. So Shulchan Aruch just confirms that and says it's not just Baruch without the Shem Hashem, it's a real bracha. Malchei Yisrael Omer Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Shechalak Michvodo Lireyav. That you gave a piece of your kavod to those who fear you. And again, V'amalchei Ovdei Kochavim Omer Baruch. And again, I don't think he's making a chiluk. I don't think we can read into it and say, by Malchei Umat Olam, you don't say Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam. I don't think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, Shenasan Michvodo Libasar Vadam. And again, we see the difference, which we'll get to in a second, that by Malchei Yisrael you say Shachalak Lireyav, and by Malchei Umat Olam you say Shenasan Libasar Vadam. Very interesting. And the Shulchan Aruch, again, in source number 4, brings down the second part of the Gemara, lahalacha, mitzvah lihishtadel lirotz milachim, afilu malchei umos olam. Again, for the reasons that Rashi gave us, based on the Gemara, so we'll be able to compare that honor to the honor of Mashiach and the honor of those who get schar for mitzvos. The Mishnah Berurah.
Interesting that it's not about the kavod of the at all.
It sounds like, and we're going to see that throughout the night, it sounds like it has nothing to do with giving honor to the king, of like keeping him happy. That's what it sounds like. From all of these discussions, I mean, there are probably those that discuss that, but it sounds like it has nothing to do with shalom, it has nothing to do with peace, it has to do with the fact that we have to have a point of comparison so that we'll be able to compare him to the Melech HaMashiach. It's very fascinating. Again, they're not going to tell you to go ahead and spit in his face, but then again, they're saying that that's not necessarily the reason that you should be mishtadel to go. And you have to remember, there was a time where the worst thing you could possibly do is get in front of the king. You know, we're thinking in a time where like it's like, oh, it's exciting to go on a plane to Israel with Harper. Of course, it's a beautiful thing, but there were times where you needed to do anything that you could to stay away from the Melech, because if you got anywhere near him and you were a Jew, or you even looked at him the wrong way, so then off with your head. But it's an interesting point that you would think that there would be some type of, mandate to go ahead. And obviously there is a mandate, and we talk about in Pirkei Avos, there's different things about the Malchus, but it doesn't seem like this is based on the mandate to keep good relations with the Malchus. It doesn't sound like it's based on that.
Does the 30-day rule apply here also in terms of how often you see the Melech?
Right, so we're not going to get to that tonight, but I did see brought down in one of the sources that there seemingly was, I have an article here, and I saw at the end he brought it down. And I believe he says they'd have to wait the 30 days as well, I believe. Shehelo davar chadash v'yeh beriyaso. Right, interesting. That's what he seems to say. Okay. There's a very interesting. So the Meforshim say, and I think this might be I think this might go along the lines of your point. And my wife actually asked me this. I was telling her quickly what I'm giving the shiur on. So like she had like 1 second. So she said to me one thing, like, what happens if you don't like the guy, or if he's not a nice guy? So I think this might go to your point as well. That we're not necessarily saying the bracha because he's a nice guy or he's a rasha. There's plenty of melechs out there, plenty of kings plenty of malachim who are rashas. But seemingly, and this is what the Meforshim seem to say, that since it's not about him being a good person, but it's about comparing him to the kavod that's going to be given at the end of days to Melech HaMashiach, to the people that are going to get schar for mitzvos, so it shouldn't make any nafkamina, it shouldn't make a difference if he's a rasha or if he's a tzaddik. At the end of the day, you're not, again, blessing him, you're sort of going lihishtadel, and you're blessing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you're going to see him so that you'll have a point of comparison. And therefore, most of the Meforshim say you would say this even if the guy was a rasha, because again, it's not about the king per se, it's more about the idea of seeing and making the bracha to HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
The bracha should not
again, the guy still has kavod. Oh, so you want to say he's not a basar v'dam. So maybe, I don't know, the guy might not be a human being in a chanami, but the point is that we're not blessing that this guy's a great guy. We're blessing the fact, we're not even saying that he should have length of power. We're just saying we're blessing HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave from his kavod to a basar v'dam. The Mishnah Berurah says something very interesting. If you look at the Mishnah Berurah in source number 5, so he says, Liros melachim, you should be mishtadel liros melachim, umutter letame betuma shel divrehen mipnei kvodan. You can actually even go ahead, this is such an important thing to do, that you could actually go ahead and be metame yourself with a tumah dirabanan. Again, nowadays it's not so applicable, but you could even be metame yourself with a tumah dirabanan mipnei kvodan bein lemalchei Yisrael bein lemalchei umas olam. It's so important to do this and to be mishtadel, to see them and to have the comparison, that you could even be metame yourself if that's what it comes to in order to be able to do this. V'chein mipnei kavod habrios. And he adds, similarly for kavod habrios could go in leilech lenachem avelim. If you want to be menachem avelim, the only way to do it is to be metame yourself, then you're allowed to be metame yourself midirabanan too. Now look at this. Im roeh pam achas hamelech lo yivatel yoter mili mudo liroto. Im lo sheba bechayil yoser v'kavod gadol yoser. If you see him one time, so then you should not be mevatel milimudo. You shouldn't go ahead and miss your seder again, miss your chavrusa again, to see him again, if he's not coming with a greater army, with more kavod. What does that imply? Besides for once enough, but that implies something that I wouldn't have even thought. That implies that you should be mevatel your limud at least once to go ahead to greet the king, to see the king, which is something that you might not have thought. And therefore you're seeing from the Mishnah Berurah how important this mitzvah is, that the second time and third time, so then you shouldn't miss night seder every night if the president's in town, or we'll get to the president in a second, if the melech's in town, you shouldn't miss every night to go ahead and see him. So that you could have, once is enough. But the chiddush here is that you would even do it once. And that it's so important to have this, and it's not some made up thing in the times of Mashiach that we don't even think about, but that it's so important that we should go ahead and we should be mishtadel, and we should even miss chavrusas, we should even miss our limudo, in order to be able to go ahead and have this point of comparison in our minds. Very interesting. Fine. So now let's discuss the text of the bracha a little bit. As we mentioned, the text of the brachas are different. Now it's very interesting to note the Rambam in Hilchos Brachos. What do you notice here? Malchei Yisrael Omer Shenasan michvodo umigvuraso lireyav. First of all, he adds a word that God not only gave from his kavod, from his gvuraso lireyav. Malchei umos olam mivarich shenasan michvodo lebasar vadam. What do you notice? Interesting. So the Rambam makes no such distinction of shechalak versus shenasan, and we'll see that that's not to the benefit of the Jew, because as we'll see, chalak is a more intimate relationship. But he's saying that by Malchei Yisrael, and I wonder, I didn't see anything that spoke about this. I mean, it was clear that he had changed it, but I wonder if the Rambam's hinting to something by saying that even by Malchei Yisrael you wouldn't say shechalak, which again, as we'll see in a second, chalak is more of an intimate relationship. It's like a piece of, a chelek. So that's what we understand, that by Malchei Yisrael it's chalak. But it seems like the Rambam, interestingly, is paskening that you would add migvuraso, but more importantly for our purposes, you would not say shechalak even by a Malchei Yisrael. Okay. Next. So let's just see the Shulchan Aruch to realize that, as I mentioned in the beginning, there's also a bracha when you see Chachmei, when you see people that are Chachamim. And there's a whole discussion that by a Chachmei Yisrael doesn't mean a Talmid Chacham in, right? Seemingly Chachmei Yisrael means in Torah, and a Chachmei Umas Ha'olam means in secular knowledge. So you see in the Shulchan Aruch in source number 7 and source number 8, Haroach Chachmei Yisrael Omer Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Shechalak, again, Mechach Maso Lireyav. Just interesting to note that there's a bracha for Talmid Chacham, and again, it's a similar thing, except Shechalak Michvodo, it's Shechalak Mechach Maso Lireyav. And Haroach Chachmei Umas Ha'olam Ovdei Kochavim Shechachamim Bechachmos Ha'olam, and there's a whole discussion. If they're a Chacham in Avodah Zarah, then you don't necessarily make a bracha. There's a whole discussion exactly what they have to be a Chacham in. One of the big 7, which I don't know off the top of my head. If anybody does, you can scream it out. Omer Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam Shenasan, again, Mechach Maso Libasar Adam. The same exact thing. It's just Mechach Maso instead of Michvodo. Fine. So let's see the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef, again, Rabbi Yosef Cairo. So he gives two reasons why there's a distinction between Shechalak versus Shenatan. Hatam shebechachmei Yisrael Omer Shechalak. Ubechachmei Umos Ha'olam Omer Shenasan. Again, he's talking about the Chachmei, but it would apply to the Malchei as well. Nireh shehu mipnei shenefashot Yisrael chatzuvot mitachat kisei hakavod. Jewish souls are hewn from underneath the kisei hakavod. Hareim kechelek Hashem. Therefore, they are a piece of Hashem. Very interesting. So when we say Shechalak, literally, we are a chel of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Each and every one of us has a piece of God in us. Very interesting. As we'll see in a second, Ki chelek Hashem amo. Aval nefashos umos ha'olam rechokim mimenu yisbarach. Obviously, they're somehow a piece of God, right? Depends. They have a soul. They not have a soul, right? But they're a piece of God too, but not in the same way. Aval nefashos umos ha'olam rechokim mimenu yisbarach. Behem kemisha nosein matana minechasav she'enam chelek mimenu. Very interesting. So we Jews are considered to be a chelek, a small piece of God. Gentile, non-Jewish souls, on the other hand, seem to come from a place that's further, more distant from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we say that by a Jew, Shechalak, he literally gave a piece of himself. However, by a non-Jew, we say that he gave them a gift. He didn't necessarily give them a piece of himself. So it's Shechalak, like a chelek for a Jew, as opposed to Shenatan, I gave you a gift of a kavod. Here it's Mamish, I gave you a chelek, your soul is a chelek of me, and not only that, the kavod is like a chelek of my kavod that I'm giving you. As opposed to like a gift which like has nothing to do with me, and now it goes to you, and now it's all yours. So that's one reason given for Chalak versus Natan. Rav David Abu Draham, who lived 200 years before the Beis Yosef, right? The Beis Yosef died in 1575. And the Abu Draham died approximately 1340, about 230 years before. So he kasav shehatam mipnei shehachelek hu kemo hatzinor hanimshach min hanahar. A flow of water that comes from a nahar, she'efshar leharchiva ulehagdilo. That there's this flow of water that comes from a river and it can become made wider or made longer. Ve'efshar lekatzro lechatzro. You can cut it, you can take it out a little bit. Masha'enkein b'matana ki tlusho psuka. Very interesting. Says something else. He says, Shenatan mikvodo, he gave kavod to the non-Jew. And that's it. Here's a present, do with it as you like. This is a little bit deeper than the first pshat. Now he's saying that by a Jew, it's shechalak mikvodo. It's sort of like still attached. It's a flow of water that's still attached and it could still be played with. It will be Yisrael ksiv kichelek Hashem amo levizechusa misrabeh umitma'et. Very interesting. That means basically, by a non-Jew, he gave them the kavod. Here's a gift, do with it as you'd like, quote unquote. By a Jew, by a Jewish king, it's shechalak mikvodo. He still like has a piece of it, right? Again, according to the first pshat, we are a piece of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it says chalak, like a chelek. Our soul is a part of God. The kavod is a part of God's kavod. So it's a chelek. Shenatan, he just gave it to them because their souls are separate. Over here, it's a little bit deeper. He's saying that again, the kavod to a non-Jew, he's giving it to them. Not that necessarily that we're a chelek of the soul, but that the kavod is still like attached to HaKadosh Baruch Hu per se. That what? By a non-Jew, he gives it to them and they sort of do with it as they please. But by a Jew, it's still connected to God, where if the king or if the Jewish people would sin, so then the kavod, just like a river that's connected to water, if something happens to the river, that's going to happen to the connected water. So too, based on the zchusim, or based on the sins of this king or of the Jewish people, the kavod is going to fluctuate. So it's not like I'm giving you the kavod and now do with it as you like. It's that I'm giving you the kavod, but it's sort of like still attached to me by a string. If you have this chus, so then you'll even get more kavod, both as the melech and as the Jewish people. And if you don't and you sin, then the kavod is going to sort of become a little bit shorter, and you're going to lose the kavod as a king, and you're going to lose the kavod as the Jewish people.
It's consistent with the concept of Chilul Hashem.
In what sense?
That there's a connection, that our actions actually are impacting HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Interesting. What you're saying Chilul Hashem is, you're saying it's even more than that. Chilul Hashem is that if our souls are part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not just that we're being mechalel, a separate entity. It's that when we're mechalel ourselves or somebody else, we're mamish being mechalel part of us, which happens to be part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Interesting.
Neshama is a chelik l'kamimal.
Right. Chelik l'kamimal, but he's saying it's not just a chelik l'kamimal which is detached. It's a chelik, according to the second answer at least, it's a chelik l'kamimal which is mamish, still attached, and but here he's talking about more about the kavod. That the kavod is like there, and it's opposed to the non-Jews, it's given, and over here by a Jew it's like on a string, and it's either that the string is let loose more and you get more kavod, shechalak, or it's sort of like pulled in and you get less kavod, both as the king and as the Jewish people. Now, Rav Shlomo Aviner, who's in Eretz Yisrael, so he actually makes the distinction between the second, right? The Pashup shot by this, so that's the difference in Chalak and Natan. What about Lireyav Libasar Adam? So the Pashup answer is that Lireyav are those who fear him. That would be a Jewish king. And Basar Adam is somebody who doesn't necessarily, fear God, doesn't necessarily keep the Torah. He's just a regular Basar Adam. Rav Shlomo Aviner wants to say that according to him, if you have a Jewish king who is not Lireyav, again, we're going to see in a second that Prime Minister Netanyahu might not necessarily fall into being able to have the bracha made for him. But theoretically, if you had a Jewish king who was not Lireyav, and we've had plenty of Jewish kings like that before, who do not fear HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so then since the bracha is Shechalak Mikfodo Lireyav, according to Shlomo Aviner, which is a little bit of a chiddush, you would not make a bracha on this king. Because again, it's dafka got to be a Lireyav. Would you make the bracha of Shenasan Mikvodo Lebasar V'dam? He doesn't say that. But he says that you would not make a bracha of Shechalak Mikvodo Lireyav if you're dealing with a Jewish king who is not a Yirei Hashem. Thought that was an interesting point as well. Fine.
Didn't we say previously it wasn't on the melech himself, but the covenant of his offering?
Right. So that's why it's a little bit of a chiddush. But at the end of the day, it's still nusach in the bracha is Lireyav. So it's very interesting. So again, you're timing that maybe you would make the bracha, you just would have to say Basar V'dam. Fine. So we've seen now the text of the bracha, we've explained the text of the bracha, we've explained what the source of the bracha is, we've explained what the source of really the hishtadlus is to go ahead and see the king, so that you'll have something to compare Melech HaMashiach to. The question is, what type of leader warrants this bracha? Who exactly do we say this to? Do we say this to the president of the shul? Or probably not. But who do we say this to? So it's interesting that the Gemara just says Malchei Yisrael, Malchei Umos Ha'olam. But again, what does a melech mean? What does a king mean? Who's considered to be a king? And is a president considered to be a king? Is a prime minister considered to be a king? Is a queen considered to be a king? So let's see. So there's actually a machlokes as to what type of power this king needs to have in order to warrant the bracha of Shenatan or Shechalak Mikvodo Lebasar V'dam Lireyav. So let's see the Radvaz. The Radvaz died right around the time of the Beis Yosef in 1573. The Radvaz says, Tshuva davar zenisha milifnei Rav Avraham Av Beizin v'Heshiv Kolo shel davar Kol mi shechashuv b'shultanuto. He's chashuv with his rule. What does that mean? Kemelech v'dan v'horeg b'mishpat. That seems to be the key line. He can don and kill with his judgment, i.e. he has the power to kill somebody. Ve'ein misha mishane al dvarav mehen lilav u'milav lahen. And nobody can change what he says of the positive to the negative or from the negative to the positive. He's got the final word by matters seemingly, he says, of life and death. Kimelech hu u'mivarech alav shechalak mikvodo v'shenatan mikvodo. So the Radbaz seems to be saying that only an official who's able to execute somebody is deemed to have the power to warrant this bracha. If you look at the Yechav Das, Rav Ovadia Yosef, who died in 2013. So the Yechav Das, and the reason that I say the dates that they died, I think it's just important to be able to put things into context. But the Yechav Das says something very interesting. V'lechora hayamakom lomar, in source number 12. Shenasi Medina bizman hazeh b'medina demokratit. That in a democratic Medina, she'ein lo samchut lishvot v'leharo ka'avos nafsho ein levarech alav. So one might say that a democratic nation where the president of the United States, for instance, and again, I don't know the prime minister as much, but I would say the prime minister of Canada probably the same, if not less, than the president of the United States. I don't know. Does he have the ability? I was trying to figure out. Does he have the ability to even pardon somebody? Prime Minister Harper, can he pardon somebody who's on death row?
For sure, he has less power than the.
He has less power than the president of the United States. Okay, unfortunately. Fine. So, what does he say here?
When did the Chavidas, what period of time?
The Chavadas is it's Rabbi Ovadia Yosef.
Well, sorry.
Yeah, the Chavadas is Rabbi. He just died in 2013.
Yeah.
So he says that you might think that you can't, or that you shouldn't make a bracha on a democratic president, for instance, because he doesn't have matters of life and death in his hands. President Obama can't just go ahead and kill anybody that he wants. Ulam nira shahoel v'yesh biyado shel nasi medina likabel o lidchot hamlatzas chanina. Seemingly he's saying a pardon. Since he has the ability to issue a pardon on Misha Nidon Lamus al Yedei Bate HaMishpat Hamusmachim Lekach, since he has the ability to pardon somebody on death row, Nimsa Shesimchas Dine Nefashas Mesura Biyado. That's enough, says Rav Ovadia, to consider that matters of life and death are in his hands. V'arehu Kimelech Shedan V'horei Kimishpat. Very interesting chiddush. So again, according to the Radbaz, if I ask you what kind of king warrants saying a bracha, the king that warrants a bracha is a king that can go ahead and kill somebody. That's seemingly to be the summary of what he says. Rav Ovadia Yosef seems to add that he doesn't just have the power to kill somebody, because if he needed the power to kill somebody, then seemingly like a president of a democratic country would not have that power. At least President of the United States, for instance. But Rav Ovadia says that when we're talking about matters of life and death, it's not necessarily matters where you can go ahead and give somebody the death penalty, even if he has the right to pardon somebody, so he would be included in that type of melech who has rights of life and death in his hand, and therefore Rav Ovadia would say that you would say this bracha on the President of the United States in terms of this svara of matters of life and death. If you hold that that's the criteria, so then according to Rav Ovadia, according to the Radbaz, you would in fact say the bracha on the president of somebody, or the melech that has the ability to pardon somebody from death, not just somebody that has the ability to kill somebody.
So in the states where you can get a governor's pardon.
Excellent. So there are those who mention, and seemingly Rav Ovadia would say the same thing, that if you get a governor's pardon, so then seemingly based on this Rav Ovadia Yosef, you should actually say the bracha on a governor as well. That's what it would seem like. I thought about that, I actually saw that also. You didn't say the word governor, but it would seemingly be that a governor also, where there are states, you can get a governor. Can you get it in every state? You can get a governor's pardon in any state?
But you know it works in Texas.
In Texas, okay. That's where they kill people.
They just kill.
Yeah.
This is just an example of Osama bin Laden. I think the decision was made by the president whether or not to execute the mission or not.
But
Now, let's say, for example, I know, so I was going to say, is that relevant? Let's say, the same thing may apply to, I don't know, the Prime Minister. It's an incident where it's their call to say whether or not we're going to do a mission that would kill somebody.
I'm not sure.
Is
I'm not sure.
necessarily required? Because he says in there,
I'm not sure.
Mishpah.
I'm not sure. It would sound like it's within the regular laws of the land and not matters of war. Because then an army general also has the ability, and then you start going, before you know it, every Joe Schmo, you're going to be saying the bracha to. Right.
Harper, it's like a recent incident that advisors to the Iraqis, I believe, were at the front lines and they were fired upon, so they fired back and eliminated it, and he was questioned and he said, well, that's what they got to do.
Right.
So he's really saying.
Interesting. I would think that by war it would be different. It seems like these chuvos are saying that even in the day-to-day life of the country, in the day-to-day way of the laws of the land, he has the right to be able to pardon somebody as well. So that's one type of power that a king must have. According to one school of thought, he needs to have the power to be able to kill, to be able to pardon. Rav Moshe Sternbach, Shlita, in the Chuvos Ve'anhagos, so you see in source number 11, So he says something very interesting. Because what would you say, based on what we saw in the Gemara? What would you say if I asked you, what's the criteria of the king that you would say the bracha on a king? What would you say what would you say the criteria is based on the Gemara? What?
Just the Gemara?
Just on the Gemara. What would you say the
He
source?
has to have the covenant.
That's it. Right? And that's what the Chuvas and Hagos seems to say. He says, let's not lose track of why we're doing this. Let's say a guy, again, like Obama, for instance, as we'll see in a few minutes. We have a few more minutes to go. But let's see Obama, for instance, as we'll get to. So he doesn't necessarily, at least in my mind, he doesn't necessarily get the kavod that you think of when you're talking about honor. And again, we're going to get to the way that he dresses. He wears a regular suit. He doesn't necessarily have this whole entourage with him. So in terms of the kavod, and if you're going to go back to the source, back to the Gemara, which seems to imply that it's all about the kavod, so Obama might have the right to pardon, but in terms of the kavod, like, it's not so impressive that he has a few Secret Service. I'm saying you don't like look at him and say, wow, look at that kavod.
The queen is more impressive.
The queen is much more impressive, even though she doesn't have the right to pardon, necessarily. Even though she, or any figurehead. The kavod that they get, if you're going to go back to the source, to the Gemara, it's going to make a lot more sense than somebody that doesn't have the right to pardon. So that's Rav Moshe Sternbach's argument. Moshe Sternbach is going to argue that, what do you mean? You're losing track of the whole thing. It's not based on somebody that can pardon. It might be that a person who can pardon, who can kill, it might be that they're going to be given more kavod, because if people are smart, they're going to give the guy kavod. But at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about a person who can kill or not kill, who can pardon or not pardon. It's about a melech, it's about a leader who has kavod given to them. And again, because the whole purpose of seeing the kavod and the basis, seemingly, of the bracha is the kavod, so that you'll have something to compare it to in the times of Mashiach. That's what Rav Moshe Sternbach says in source number 11. England. Yehudim omdim bul ha'armon. They stand outside the palace. V'lifamim ha'malka mistakeles b'chutz v'az mevarchim. And the malka comes out and she does her hand waving thing, and then they make a bracha. And he doesn't understand necessarily why. Shelechora nira shehabracha rak sheoveres b'rechov kimalka. Seemingly, again, he's just timing exactly when the bracha should be said. Maybe it should only be said when she's in the rechov like a malka. V'kula mechabdin osa. And they're all giving her kavod v'rom kvoda she'azroi levarech. Shelo aleha mevarchim. Exactly our point. He says it straight. Shelo aleha mevarchim. We're not blessing on the melech. We're not blessing on the malka. Ella al kivoda. Right there. You sum up the whole shir. We're blessing on the kavod given to them. So he says, I'm not sure if you should be doing it again. I would argue maybe that you see plenty of honor when she's standing out there and you see hundreds of thousands of people, whoever's standing there and looks and wants to get a piece of her. He says in parentheses, I'm confused. So let's say you get into the palace and you get to go in. So you might say, oh wow, that's really chashuv. But inside the palace, you're going to see a lot less honor given. You'll see a beautiful palace, but you won't see the same honor given to a melech or to a malka that you'd see if they were walking on the street. Maybe you dafka make the bracha when they're outside of the palace, when everybody's gathered around and giving them the kavod. Very nice to have a private meeting. It's very special for you. Maybe you can make the bracha when it's just one-on-one inside. It's very special. It's pretty cool. But you're not going to see the kavod the same way you'll see it when you're in the street and there are thousands of people that are coming. Aval Efshar, he says, but in general, he's saying it's possible that since in general they give them kavod when they're outside, he says it's very possible to suggest that even if at the time, even if you want to time it that at the time that she's waving, she's not getting the same type of kavod, or when you're inside one-on-one, they're not getting the same type of kavod. L'mais, it's a person who gets kavod usually, and you know about that kavod, so it would be Roy Levarach. But for our purposes, the point of this Chuvas Van Hagos, or Moshe Sternbach, is to see again that based on the Gemara, the type of power that the king has to have is not necessarily power. It's that this king, this leader, needs to have kavod given to them, and that fits in, honestly, a little bit better with the Gemara, which seems to be saying that the whole purpose of all of this is to compare it to the kavod. So again, we have the reason for the bracha is either because of the criteria. Seemingly the reason was, again, to see them because of the kavod, to compare it to Melech HaMashiach, but the criteria was either the power that they have to kill or to keep alive, but seemingly a more important criteria would be how much honor they get. And therefore, again,
according to Rabbi Sternbach, we could extend that then to religious leaders, let's say the Pope.
Interesting, right. He doesn't say that, but one could maybe say that, right.
Argument.
I could definitely hear that argument, that if there's or even a Jewish leader that gets, if when Rabbi Yashiv or whoever it was, Moshe Feinstein, when he was alive, for instance. So again, there is a bracha for a Talmid Chacham, And there's actually another discussion. What happens if it happens to be that the melech is also a Talmid Chacham? So would you make both brachas as well? But it's an interesting point you're saying that even for religious leaders, it might be the same, that if they're getting a certain type of kavod, so then that'll serve the purpose as well. A very interesting point. Again,
You make, in that case, like a melech is a Talmid Chacham, you make 2 brachas?
so I believe it's brought down in the...
Maybe you just make shahako.
I don't remember. Okay. So again, two of the practical nafkaminas would be, between this idea of honor versus power, would be the bracha on the President of the United States, for instance, or as you said, a governor. The President of the United States has the power to pardon, and therefore if it's based on the power to kill or the power to pardon, so then you would make a bracha on the President of the United States. But again, if it's based on honor, so then one can argue that even though he holds such a high position, he doesn't necessarily get the honor. Now, the Chuas and Hagos actually says something very interesting here. If you look at source number 13, along these lines, Aval hanasi de'artzot habrit yicholim lahadicho, you could push up and say he doesn't get the bracha. Again, this is within the svara that you're not making it because of the power to pardon, but you're making it because of the honor. Why would you not make it? Because de'artzot habrit yicholim lahadicho. What does that mean?
Gets reelected.
No, lehadicho. They can impeach him. They can push him away. They can impeach him. They can get rid of him. Umachus lizman. He only gets 4 more years, even though he'd probably get reelected. Umachus lizman. He only gets a certain amount of time. Eino dom el melech ve'ein roi levarech alav. And he's not considered to be like a melech. Now this is a very interesting svara, because at the end of the day, it shouldn't make a difference that he has a limited term. It should really only make a difference that he's getting the honor now that he's getting. Again, I think that one can argue, like I said before, that the honor that President Obama gets, or any president for that matter, might not be the honor if you're going within the svara, that it's all based on honor and not based on being able to kill or pardon. In my mind, that honor is not comparable to the honor given to a melech. That's not the same thing. When you see Obama and he's walking, even though I've never seen him, but you see any president and they're walking, you know they have their Secret Service after that. But again, a lot of it has to do with what they're wearing ties, especially when they're chilling out in Camp David and we're going to Hawaii and wearing like. But that's part of things that we are like very desensitized to. Like, certain people will never let you see. You notice somebody like a Talmid Chacham, you'll never see them like letting their garb down because it's sort of like your persona. Like the president thinks he's got to like look cool and chilled and beer and this and that also sometimes, but like we have the opposite extreme where like, you'll never see a Talmid Chacham, you never see a gadol without a suit, without a tie, without a hat on, That's just an interesting thing to keep in mind. But Rav Moshe Sternbach seems to be saying, again, within the fact that we're making the bracha and we're being mishtadel, we're trying to see him because of the honor, so he would say that that might be a practical difference, where if it's based on the power that he has to kill to pardon, then you would make a bracha on the President of the United States. If it's just based on the honor, then because he can be impeached, because he has a limited term, because like we're saying, maybe the honor that's given to him is not necessarily the honor that would fit up the criteria, so you would not necessarily make a bracha. Another practical difference between whether it's power versus honor would be, Lamaisa here would be the monarch, would be the Queen of England. Would be a similar thing. Again, as far as I know, the Queen of England doesn't necessarily have the power to pardon or to kill somebody. Maybe she does, but as far as I know, she doesn't necessarily have that power. So if it's based on the power, then you would not make the bracha on the Queen of England. But if she's a figurehead, even if she has no official law-making duties, at the end of the day, she clearly gets honor. And if it's all based on the honor, so then one would make a bracha on the Queen of England.
Her picture's on the money, that's why.
What?
Pictures on the money, that's why.
Her picture's on the money also.
In Talmudic times, this distinction between honor and the power to power over life and death.
It was probably one and the same, though, no?
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying.
In the time that these brachas were formulated,
you got the honor if you were a person that had power of life and death.
Kings were probably, most kings, kings were often probably hated.
Right.
They weren't very many benevolent kings in the time, and they ruled despotically. So it seems to me that they were probably at the time one and the same.
Right, and therefore Lafia Niyaz Daiti, the way that I'm reading into it, again, I'm not arguing on Rav Adi Yosef, he's just giving a suggestion based on others, but Lafia Niyaz Daiti, according to my humble opinion, I would tend to side with the tzad that says that it's more important about the honor than necessarily the power for life and death. Because at the end of the day, going back to the original source, which is what you always want to do, that if it's about the fact that we want to compare the honor, so then Enochanami, somebody like the Queen of England, I would understand a lot more to give her the honor to make the bracha on her than somebody like President Obama, just as an example, who might have the power but doesn't necessarily have the honor.
And what if this, like, the honor is, it seems to me that honor is this subjective quality.
In economics.
You know, you could have a town in Ireland, right, that has no respect whatsoever for the Queen. If you were a Jew living in that town in Ireland, is the halachic requirement different than living in London?
Right. So seemingly no. Seemingly you would say that it would be for, again, it's not necessarily based on, it's based on what the world perceives as honor, I guess. But it's an interesting question. Again, it's impossible to know exactly the details of this exact, but I think we're getting the basic general idea.
Going back to the Pope kind of comparing it to the Queen, she's also the head of the Church of England. Does that play in any of it, or is it just?
I don't think so. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look, Dafka, when it uses the example, so what does it say? It says that you're giving the bracha to Malchei. It says Malchei Umas Ha'olam once, but actually when the Shulchan Aruch brings it down, it's Malchei Ovdei Kochavim. So it sounds like it's not necessarily that you wouldn't give it. It sounds like in the Shulchan Aruch that it's not a din that you wouldn't give it to a religious figure. It sounds like Malchei Ovdei Kochavim, not just Malchei Umos Ha'olam. Even and that's an excellent point. Maybe that's in fact why the Shulchan Aruch changes a little bit the words of the Gemara. The words of the Gemara is very sensitive. It's a very good pickup. The Malchei Umos Ha'olam, the Gemara says, when the Shulchan Aruch brings it down, it doesn't say Malchei Umos Ha'olam. He says Malchei Ovdei Kochavim, which is an interesting point. Fascinating. Okay, excellent. We see you learn more from giving the shiur than preparing. So there's actually an interesting question. Once we're talking about the Queen of England, so there's an interesting question whether you should be making a bracha on the Queen at all, whether you should be making a bracha on seeing a female monarch. Very interesting. What's the question whether you should be saying a bracha on a female monarch? Well, some say that if you look at the Gemara in Ksuvos, in number 14, you have a little bit of a problem. Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Mutter li stakel bifnei kala kol shiva. You can look at the kala for 7 days. Very good. Okay. If I was the husband, I'd probably beat you up. But you can look at the kala for 7 days. Kedei lechaviv al bala. So that you can make her chaviv, you can make her special to her husband. Her husband's going to love her if you look at her. Why? Says Rashi. Kisheroa hakom mistaklin ba, nichnas yofia bilibo. Unfortunately, we take this too seriously, and we want people to look, but that's not really the sneerous way that we want people to look at our wives so that we'll feel special. But the point is that you might think that you can go ahead and look at a kala at the wedding especially, and you should dafka look, because when everybody's looking and staring at her and saying how beautiful she is, so then you're going to go ahead and now the chassan's really going to love her. And we see v'les hilchas hakavaseh. The halacha is not like that. There is a whole discussion in the Gemara there that you say kalana v'chasuda, that you have to get a glimpse. But again, as we'll see in a second, it sounds like you shouldn't go ahead and look at her just so that her husband, it doesn't override tzniya so that her husband will actually like her. Hopefully your husband will like her even if you're not mistakel ba. So they actually, some, and again it sounds a little bit radical, but some say that based on this, you should not say a bracha on seeing a queen, because you're not allowed to look at a queen. Just like you're not allowed to look at this woman seemingly in the Gemara over there, you're not allowed to look at the queen. Okay, now they suggest that there are some the rejection to this idea that you're not allowed to look at the queen based on this Gemara, you're not allowed to look at this woman. There are three possible rejections. First of all, there's no objection in halacha of seeing a woman, right? Seemingly the prohibition over there is to gaze, is to stare at the woman. And again, as we said in the Gemara there in fact says that you should go ahead and, so that you're not a chakrin, you should take a quick glance at the kala and then tell her husband how beautiful she looks. The point over there is probably saying you shouldn't follow her around for 7 days, you shouldn't stare at her for 45 minutes in order to make the chassan like her. But a quick glance would be fine. So don't tell me that it's usher to look at the Queen of England and therefore I can't make a bracha. The second thing would be that if you told me that you can't make a bracha on the Queen of England, so then you're basically saying to me that nobody can make a bracha. What's the problem? Who's supposed to make this bracha? Men and women. It's not necessarily a mitzvah as man grama. So a woman needs to make the bracha too. So what are you going to tell me? You're going to tell me that the halacha is going to tell me that only a woman should make this bracha on a queen and not a man? Hard to hear, he's saying. The argument seems hard to hear that it would only be that a woman would make a bracha on a woman monarch, but that a man would not necessarily make a bracha. And finally, again, as we're not going to get to tonight, but we'll see that there's also discussion about whether you have to actually see the king or whether you have to actually see the queen. You could just see the kavod, you just see the entourage, and maybe you can make a bracha for that as well, according to many. Fine. There's a fascinating point before we conclude. So that's one reason. Those are three possible reasons to reject this Gemara that you can't look at a woman. So the suggestion that you can't make a bracha on the Queen of England because you can't look at the woman is not a good suggestion. Rav Sternbach gives another suggestion. If you look over here in source number 17, V'ra'iti l'kam rabbeinu rabnei zmanenu shedanu im levarich al malka d'lo shayach hatam haniskar b'gemara levarich kadei shem yiske liros atzilavo yavchin b'malchei Yisrael l'malchei akum. Why? Sharei etzleinu rak melech v'lo malka. Interesting. So he says no. There's another argument. There are those who suggest that since Jewish law does not allow for a malka, for a Jewish female monarch, so therefore we're not going to recognize the authority of even a non-Jewish female monarch. Very interesting. But he says, again, and you could probably answer this yourself, V'devarim temuim, because what did we say all along? We're not making the bracha on what? On the female monarch. We're making the bracha on who? We're making a bracha on the kavod given to her. And that's what he says. V'divrayim temuhin, she'ein mevarchen ella al kavod malchus. She'im yiske yavchin. So that at the end of days, when there's Zman Mashiach, you'll be able to be yavchin between the kavod given to her, not her per se, but the kavod given to the malchus, and the kavod given to the melech HaMashiach. V'shayach bein b'melech ubein b'malka. Umashe donu mizesh shum iser histaklus, like we said, and if you want to argue that you can't look at her, lo shayach klal de lo tzrichen leistakava. You don't got to stare at her for 45 minutes. You take a quick glance, ela michvoda keshoveres v'az dafka roi levarach. Even if you argue that it's not enough to say it based on her whole entourage and based on all of her cars and everything, you don't got to stand there and look at her for 45 minutes. You take a quick glance and you're done. So we see that this idea that you would not make a bracha on the malka is actually rejected, and you would make a bracha on a malka just like you would make a bracha on a melech, because there's no problem with looking at her. And even if you have to look at her, you take a quick glance. If you're going to argue that the Gemara in Ksuba says you can't look at the kala, yeah, that's talking about staring at her. But take a glance. And then the second thing that he says, which is even the stronger point, is that lemaisa, we're not making the bracha on her. We're making a bracha on the kavod given to her. There's a fascinating minchas chinuch. This is something that we should look into further at another time. Minchas chinuch, who died in 1874, says this idea about not making it on a malka because we don't have Jewish malkas. He says something fascinating. He says that's not necessarily true. And he raises the possibility that we could actually have a Jewish malka. Som taksim melech v'lo malka. It's a chiddush, but the Minchas Chinuch says that it's just a side point, but it's fascinating to see. Look in source number 18. Umevur v'Rambam u'v'Rav HaMechaber de'ein ma'amidin isha b'malchus shneimar melech v'lo malka ve'efshar lomar, says the Minchas Chinuch, dafka b'tchilas haminoi. That's only to appoint a female monarch, a female king, a queen. Aval b'Yerusha, it's possible to suggest that if she inherits the throne, im hiniach bas, efshar de'af habas yoreshet hamalucha. Fascinating. Minchas Chinuch seems to say a svara, seems to say a chiddush here, that even though we have a halacha that we don't appoint a queen, it's possible that if the melech would die and there would be no kings to take over, there would be no yoresh to take over, it's possible, again, not solely halacha l'maisa, but it's possible to suggest that it's only som tasim alech hamelech, it's only an isser to put a malka on you, but that you would be able to, maybe a malka would be able to inherit the throne, assuming that there's nobody else to inherit it in the family. Very fascinating.
That was the case with Queen Elizabeth.
That there was nobody else to inherit it in that case. Right. So the question is, from a halachic perspective, most would say she would not inherit it. But the Minchas Chinuch is raising the possibility that the som tasim alech hamelech v'lo malka, to place initially a melech v'lo malka, maybe there is open to the possibility that the pasuk is telling us that a malka can in fact inherit it like Queen Elizabeth.
Was there ever a malka in Jewish history, like Helen? Doesn't sound.
The what? Yeah, but again, the question is if there's a malka by herself, not because of the king, not because she's married to the melech. So let's just finish, and again, along the same lines, and this is a similar question, but it's another nafkamina from before, whether it's a din in honor or a din in power. So what happens if you see a king in commoner's clothing? And again, we touched upon this before. Let's say you see a king and he's not wearing the royal garb. So the Yechavedah says in source number 19, he's chilling out on the ranch, the president on his ranch. Kemo HaMelech Shalovesh Big Day Malchus. You don't say his greatness, like when he's wearing the king stuff. Again, my argument would be that the president never wears that stuff. Shekulam B'Rom Esikar Tiferes Gedula So. That when they're wearing the real stuff, the real royal garb, everybody sees the greatness. Ube'emesh shahagon Rav Yoshia Pinto b'shut nifchar mikesem nishalim aras hamelech shulavish be'echad ha'am imevarech alav birchas hamelach and v'heishiv she'ein levarech birchas hamelach ela bizman shirom es hamelach bichvodo. Only when you see him bichvodo shekein nusach habracha shenatan michvodo lebatzar v'dam. It's not honor if he's not wearing the royal garb. If he's walking around like a regular citizen, aye kvodo laharitzo. Straight from, I always love when they quote Psukim, or they quote, this is from Kedusha, right? It's from the Nusach Svar Kedusha. Yeh kavod la'aritzo. Ve'ikar kavod hu b'mabushav. Interesting. And the ikar kavod is when he's wearing the royal garb. Shu lavish b'vigdei asrad. Shebezen nikar kvodo v'tivarto. That's when everybody's going to give him the kavod. Kedivrei Yochanan sheyakori l'mabushav kodo. Gam nireh, as we would think, sherichvo parashavu b'nei chelo ha'ochin lifnei merkavaso. That his whole entourage, miklal kavodo shamelachem. That's all part of the kvodo shamelach. Vizulasam lo chalchiyuv bracha zuklal. Sounds like he's suggesting that even if he was wearing the royal garb, if he didn't have his whole entourage with him, so then it would not be a bracha. Again, it would seem to me that based on all of what we're saying here, that especially if it's based on the honor and not just on the power, which Aniyas Daiti would sort of take me in that way, so then I would have a very difficult time for one to say that one should make a bracha with Shemu Malchus on the President of the United States. The final thing is seeing a king on television. So the Shut Yichavedas actually mentions this and says that if you have to see a bracha on a melech, for instance, let's say you're not going to make a bracha on the president with Shemu Malchus, but now you're watching the news and you see a picture of the president. So if the president's a woman, you're not going to see him on the Jewish news or in the Jewish newspaper, that's for sure. But if it's a man, so now you see a picture, so what are we going to do? So Rabbi Yossi says, V'dasha ro'es ha-melech b'televizia, in source number 20, Einu mevarech ala birchas ha-malachim. If you see it on television, you don't make a bracha. Sharei zeh domeh lema shekasav hagon Rav Shmuel Abuhav b'shut devar Shmuel, sharoes ha-levana mitoch mares shel zechuchas. If you see the levana in a mirror, Einu mevarech aleha. Very interesting, because if something is a reflection of something, it's not considered to be witnessing the actual object itself. And therefore, if you see the bracha, if you see the president or king on television, you're not actually seeing them, you're seeing a picture of them. So Rabbi Ari Leibowitz actually ends, and he says that he heard from reliable sources. He hears from reliable sources from the Telz Yeshiva in the 1950s, that I guess when Queen Elizabeth she's been around since the 50s? Mm-hmm. But in the 1950s, what year? 1953. Okay. That when Queen Elizabeth was inaugurated in 1953, don't repeat this, but they brought a television into the yeshiva so that the boys can watch the ceremony, and not just that they could watch the ceremony, they actually made a bracha. Supposedly in the Telz Yeshiva in Cleveland, they made a bracha when they saw the Queen of England on the thing. Olam hafoch ra'isi, as they would say. V'nafochu. So again, one can argue, and I can hear the argument, that again, you don't need the physical presence of the Queen or the physical presence of the king, because after all, if it's going back to what we started the whole shiur with, that it's all based on the honor accorded. So I can see very nicely on my television, especially in 2015 on my big plasma flat screen 60-inch television, if I see the honor given and I see all these shots and I see the tremendous honor given to the Queen of England at her inauguration, so then I'll have very clearly in my mind, probably even better than if I was there maybe, if I see it from afar and I see all these people and I see the honor, I'll have very clearly in my mind the comparison to be able to make ultimately in the times of Mashiach, which going back to the source with which we started, ultimately seems to be the purpose of trying to be mishtadel to see it anyway. So one can argue that maybe one would make a bracha on seeing the king or seeing the queen, even on television. Again, lemaiseh, a king who gets honor and can kill, as you were pointing out, which always used to be the case, for sure you would make a bracha b'shem malchus. It's very unclear if the President of the United States, because he has the power not to kill, but only to pardon, and for all the reasons I was saying, he doesn't necessarily have the honor that we would say is accorded the honor. So it would be very hard to say that one should make a bracha on the President of the United States b'shem malchus. But, as Rav Ovadia seems to imply somewhere else, maybe one would say without Shem Hashem. And again, if anything, based on our discussion tonight, there would be more of a reason, seemingly, to say a bracha b'shem malchus on the Queen of England than there would be on the President of the United States, which is not necessarily what you would have thought before walking into the shiur tonight. But at the end of the day, you can always say the bracha without Shem malchus, without a Kadosh Baruch Hu's name. But for sure, if you would see a king who has matters of life and death in his hand, and he's wearing the royal garb, and he has the royal entourage with him, for sure you would say the bracha. Again, in cases where you're not sure, so then one should probably say the bracha without Shem U'Malchus. Shkoyach, have an excellent night.